And today we'd like to talk about adult mentoring, the importance of it in our community, the impact that we all can have through mentoring, and try to demystify it a little bit for those of you who might consider becoming mentors. So let me just give you the short take on how Terry and I connected. And I'll begin with a confession. Throughout my life, I've had a few missteps, maybe even committed a sin or two along the way. But I was privileged to have a lot of role models and mentors around me who steered me in a new direction or allowed me to take some corrective action so that the consequences of my errors were not as severe as they might have been. And so a number of years ago, I decided it was time to pay forward the blessing of mentorship. And so I got involved with mentoring primarily men, adult mentoring. And I did so through an organization here in Sioux Falls called the Community Outreach, which has an adult mentoring program called the Genesis Program. And so I took on a number of men through that program over the years. Most of them were men coming out of incarceration or institutionalization. Also might be, we're dealing with recovery issues, recovering from alcohol and drug addiction. As you look at Terry and I, there are some obvious differences, but Terry also has had a few missteps in his life, and has had to take some corrective action. But Terry didn't have that same benefit. He grew up with loving mother, some good people around him, but did not have the guidance that could have prevented some pretty drastic consequences for Terry. As somebody who believes in second chances, it was my great honor to connect with Terry some 4 years ago. And so we initially started off mentoring through this program of the community outreach called the Genesis Program. But when that was done, and that's about a 12-week curriculum, as I recall, Terry, when that was done, we just continued to meet. And so this is one of the most important relationships in my life. This also has been one of the most fulfilling things I have ever done in my life, is to have a close, confidential, truthful, honest relationship with Terry Liggins, and to help maybe provide him some guidance when he needed it, when he came to that fork in the road. But enough about me for a moment. Terry, talk about the impact that this mentoring has had on you.
Yeah, you said it good, that I didn't have a lot of people to help guide me. And even when people were trying to guide me, I wasn't at a place to receive it because of a lot of things that I experienced in my childhood. I carried a lot of bitterness and resentment and lack of trust for men, particularly not having a father in my life to really wire how to trust men. Even when I had people around me who wanted the best for me, I didn't know how to do it. And what was transformative about our relationship, Jack, is when we first met for coffee the day after meeting at a social mixer, the first rule was 100% honesty. You said, shoot it straight, Terry, tell me the truth. And I remember being reserved and hesitant to tell you the whole truth because of the fear that I had of how you would perceive me or think of me, or really, to be honest, I didn't think you could handle it. I thought to myself, there's no way this gentleman can handle my entire truth. But when you challenged me, for the first time in my life, I rose to the challenge of being 100% honest. And when you returned onto me a grace, when you returned onto me an acceptance, when you created for me an experience that I never had with the man before, it completely transformed me and allowed for me to be open to all the things and all the benefits that you then import in afterwards. So for me, I think it's so important that when you think about adult mentorship, the requirement of grace, that is so necessary, that you're able to extend forward an acceptance of a person exactly where they're at in their lives. And I was in a pretty low place. I was in a dark place. I just came out of incarceration. I made the choice, I did the crime, I did the time, but here I am, I'm re-entering in 2016 with a heart for community, wanting to be a good dad, wanting to recover my career, and really not having guides and help and assistance along the way. So when you came into my life, coincidentally, it really has transformed into this amazing, amazing relationship that has been the most impactful relationship I've had in the past 4 years.
So tell the audience how we got connected. I mean, I'm not even sure you were familiar with adult mentoring programs, right? So how did you know to even come up to me and ask me out for coffee and a discussion about possibly me having some kind of mentoring role in your life?
There was another gentleman who insisted that I do so. Rest his soul, C.O. Powell, African-American gentleman here in this town, years of service in financial and community service, who said, Terry, approach that man and ask him to be your mentor. Ask if he would be willing to teach you, or you tell him that you want to learn from him. And that was blind. I had no idea what I was really getting into when he suggested that I do that. But because of the trust I have for Mr. Powell, I went in on faith, and you returned the commitment, and we got coffee the next day.
And it was at that meeting the next day at Kaladi's, right, over coffee, that I agreed to mentor you as long as we maintained honesty and were forthright with one another. And so we connected through a formal mentoring program of the community outreach called the Genesis program. They provided the training to me as a mentor. They also provided some training for Terry and provided other resources. And it was a 12-week curriculum. We had, I think, 14 or 15 weeks in which to complete it. And we did it. And so Terry graduated from that program. But we have continued this relationship. And if you're considering adult mentoring, that's a good way to try it out, because it's, you only have to commit to one person. Or you can actually mentor a couple if you wish. But that's a good way to try it out. And if it's not for you, well, it was only a 3 or 4 month commitment. But to me, that was very important for us to be going through a formal mentoring program where we had support and accountability. And I would commend it to others to consider that.
Absolutely. And you insisted on it. You insisted that we have some structure, something that could guide us along the way. And one thing I was talking with you about before is that how much I appreciated how you also introduced me to the community. When we were mentoring, you would arrange for us to meet at different locations throughout the community, whether that was the Aquatic Center, the Prairie Center, Shields, all these different places. And as I was trying to understand the community or learn the community, you were intentional about also introducing me to the community and also people in the community. So I think that's another important thing, that when you have this privilege of access and information and relationships, and people are trying to turn their lives around, well, they're lost and confused and they don't have much clarity. So if you can pay forward what you know in access and people, that was also another transformative piece of our mentorship.
So Terry and I, what we do, this isn't brain surgery. This is just two men coming together, caring about one another, being honest with one another. Terry holds me accountable too. And we would strongly recommend that you consider adult mentoring in this community. You could do it through the community outreach. There are also other adult mentoring programs in this community. And I will tell you that you will find it fulfilling, rewarding, and here is the proof that it makes a huge difference, because Terry Liggins has turned his life around over the last 4 years, and I am so incredibly proud of this young man. So with that, we will. I think we're going to show a video about mentoring.
Can I say one more thing on that?
You certainly can.
I would just like to say that because of what you provided for me, an example, I now pay that forward in mentorship. So when I do youth mentorship in the community for our young people that are trying to find their way, adults in reentry right now, formerly incarcerated, and those who are battling with addiction and recovery, I've now, because of how you've helped me to develop consistency, integrity, honesty, sobriety, I now am able to pay that forward through my company, the Hurdle Life Coach, and the foundation, providing mentorship. And I remember when I wanted to step into that, you know, it was I talked to you about it again, and we made sure that I was ready to pay it forward. But because of what you showed me, I'm able now to show that to others. So it then reciprocates and really begins to have the impact I know that we all can be proud of.
Mentoring is an major initiative of Sioux Falls Downtown Rotary. And so we would invite all of you to consider this, and the impact is enormous.
Fellow Rotarians and guests, and thank you for joining us today for what will be one of our most important programs yet, Rotary Reconnected, Building a Better Community. A few years ago, the Rotary Club of Downtown Sioux Falls embarked on a journey we called One Relevant It. It was a journey to discover that one relevant thing that could have a positive and long-term impact on our community. In addition to countless hours of conversations, surveys, and focus groups, we sat down with Mayor Tenhaken to ensure that we could be aligned with him and his team. Mayor Tenhaken spoke passionately about our city and why mentorship could be that one key thing we could do together to make lives and thereby our community better. That brought us to Sioux 52, the mentoring initiative whose goal is to close the known gap for available mentors, which stands today at 5,200 in the Sioux Falls area. That is 5,200 people whose lives would be positively impacted if they had a mentor. And that all happened before 2020. And that number is no doubt higher today. What 2020 has taught us more than anything is that we need each other. We need to lift up one another. We need to share our experiences with each other. But most importantly, we need to seek out to understand one another. And that is mentorship. You just heard from mentor Jack Marsh and his mentee Terry Liggins, and what the possibilities of a positive mentor-mentee relationship can look like and achieve for both the mentee and the mentor. Next, we'll be joined by Vaney Hariri and Police Lieutenant Jon Thum as we continue the important conversation around race relations and how mentorship can help us develop a culture where diversity, equity, and inclusion are deeply embedded. If you want to learn more about mentorship and the Sioux 52 initiative, please go to www.helplinecenter.org/Sioux52. I will now turn it over to Tony Knorr, who will moderate today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, President Jason, and I want to thank Jack and Terry for being here today in Thinker Studio to share their story. Thank you for your courage to be vulnerable and to inspire others to get involved. If you're listening now and you have a mentoring story to share, we want to hear from you. Please reach out to us at Downtown Sioux Falls Rotary Club @gmail.com and share that story. Whether you're Rotarian or a member of the community, we want to be able to share your story and inspire others. And as President Jason just shared, Downtown Rotary partnered with the City of Sioux Falls and a number of other stakeholders in January to launch the Sioux 52 initiative. And this is a continuation of that conversation. We're here today to really amplify and further engage that conversation and what that can mean for the greater Sioux Falls area. And for those wanting to learn more, the website that you can visit is sioux52.org, and we'll go ahead and share that. Today, we're going to transition to a conversation. We're going to welcome back two individuals who are not strangers to Downtown Rotary. Vaney Hariri is a fellow Downtown Rotarian, and Lieutenant Thum was sitting next to Vaney in early June, right after the death of George Floyd and subsequent protests that happened across the country, and also happened right here in our community. We're going to continue that conversation on race, inclusion, and reform. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the impacts of mentoring and what that can mean for our community moving forward. we talked 2 months ago. We're back here today. Downtown Rotary committed to having important conversations that are relevant to what's going on in the world. And I can't think of anything more relevant now than what's happening in our country. Our country's grappling with a lot of conversations, a lot of folks pointing to problems or differences. Today, we want to have a conversation about what makes us the same, and also what we can do to inspire, whether it's adults or youth. We're going to talk about both. But I want to thank you two for joining us to help us elevate that conversation, specifically around mentoring and building an understanding so that in turn we can build a better community. Sioux 52. Let's start there.
Yeah.
We just heard from Jack and Terry. We've had an opportunity to hear that story. We're 6 months into Sioux 52. When I mention mentoring, what emotions or what does that stoke inside of you? I want to go ahead with Lieutenant Thum.
Sure. And what comes to mind initially is we always end up with these conversations, and a lot of people saying what should be different and what should be done, and somebody should do something this way or this way, without really not going any further with what am I doing with this situation itself. Right now, we can't go out and just change everything in one broad stroke. And when it comes back to what we talk about issues sometimes is, well, how do you repair relationships? How do you work together? And you don't do it by waving a wand. And we talk about this, like talk a lot of times with police, with relationships with the public. And I said this post Ferguson too, is you can't corporately change anything. Things are changed on an individual basis. And so what am I doing to make individual memberships, individual contacts, and relationships in working on my little piece of that puzzle? And again, with mentoring, it comes back to, again, looking at what am I doing on an individual basis, as opposed to waiting for some policy or somebody else's idea to make the change that I want to see. And that's, I think, again, with COVID, we've got so much stuff on hold, right? And delayed, people kind of just hesitant to get out there. But now we start looking at, again, we're still dealing with these issues, but what are some ways that I can be that mentor?
Yeah. How about you, Vaney? Why does it matter when you think of mentoring?
I mean, it matters in a lot of ways. I mean, when we think about anybody that would view themselves as successful, or somebody that feels like they have a certain quality of life, one thing that's going to be consistent is that they have a person, right? Every person has a person. And so when we go back and we map our lives and we think about where we got our work ethic, where we think about where we realize that our life had value, when we think about how we manage challenges or any of those type of things, it's usually somebody that we had as a mentor. I served on the Human Relations Commission for almost a decade. And a couple of my mentors, fellow Rotarians, Rock Carlson and Kadira Ware, were folks that in the movement of trying to better the community, helped me understand the perspective of other people, and to be thoughtful about how to be in some of those rooms, how to be in some of those big spaces, how to use my voice and my responsibility to use my voice. And I think about where I'm at right now in this moment, and that I may not have been able to find myself here to be able to advocate on the behalf of other people had it not been for the mentorship of those men in particular, but a lot of other people who had huge effects in my life. And so when people all know intimately that they had someone in their life that helped change it, that without that person, the trajectory of their life might have gone a very different way, and a lot of times in a less than desired way. If we all know that, why would we take for granted the fact that other people need that, and even more so that we're that person for someone else? And so mentorship is one of those things that is incredibly important. It's the most obvious thing that we could do to better our communication. It's how we link generations. It's how we pass on knowledge, is through mentorship, apprenticeship, and coaching. And so we know it intuitively that it's valuable and it's important. We need people to step up and choose to participate in that, pass on some of their knowledge, because people want it, people need it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna come right back at you, Vaney. So from your vantage point, mentoring, where as a community are we hitting the mark, and where do we have our greatest opportunity?
I think, like most things with Sioux Falls, pretty good. But for us, pretty good is not good enough, because when you're in a community where we have a relatively low crime of any kind, particularly violent crime or those type of things, it's not most people that we have to worry about. Right? And so most of the time, most things are good. But we're trying to make sure that we get in every nook, crack, corner, cranny, crevice, every single area, so that nobody is left out of this. And so we do a pretty good job. We have great institutions like LSS and those type of things that have really great programs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, all those type of things. But there's still more at every level. People in business, adults, youth, particularly men of color. We need a huge influx of folks in that particular space, because that's nowhere near enough, especially as our diversity increases. So there's just a lot more to do. And this one with the Sioux 52 initiative gives us an opportunity to full-throated ask the community, hey, let's put all of our resource in it. Let's become a city of mentors to make sure that everyone knows that if you're in this community, not only are you going to have an opportunity, but you're going to have a person that's going to help you walk your way to that opportunity.
That's great.
I think, a lot of times on mentorship, we talk about professional mentorship, right? So if I look at my career from when I first walked in the door, I had no idea where I was going to end up as far as the position I'm in, my specialties, whether it's SWAT. None of this stuff I really envisioned, but professionally, I was mentored and brought to the point where I am now. And a lot of times when we think mentorship, I think many people steer towards, well, where am I going to get this person where they want to be professionally? But I think there's really a different aspect. Where am I going to be as a family man? Where am I going to be as a resident of this town? And the mentorship that takes place just on the personal growth level, I think is sometimes success isn't always measured by, what you achieve, but who you are, and stressing that too within the mentorship program, because I think some of the greatest mentors I've had have really been more focused on developing me as a person. And then the secondary stuff takes care of itself. Like, how compassionate am I for my coworkers or other people or the community that I serve? And then how does that manifest itself with professional success, right? I think there's a holistic approach that mentors take. And quote was, a lot of times I'll show you your friends and I'll show you your future. Well, maybe I'll show you your mentors and I'll show you your future too, as far as where you're heading, where you're going. Some of the names you mentioned obviously helped form you, are well recognized names within this town that have accomplished great things and have kind of helped us. We stand on the shoulders of other people sometimes, even though in this day and age we try to, pat ourselves on the back, I think, for what we do, but it's other people who bring us to that point. And I think, furthering your conversation, it's just, we can't be content with just not reaching all the other pockets that are out there. And that's for all of us to look at how we're doing that.
Yeah.
And prepare to be disappointed, by the way. Mentorship is not something that yields 100% success. But nothing worth achieving, you have to keep trying for it, right? I know countless stories where things don't always end that well, right? So let's not sell a fairy tale. There's hard work, there's commitment, and there's dedication that goes along with it from both parties. And I think be prepared for what comes ahead of you, but know that struggle is worth struggling for.
Yeah.
So
that's great perspective, and that's both on the mentor and mentee relationship. It's not always a linear, it actually likely is not going to be
For sure.
a linear move forward towards positivity. And I'll just pause there. Vaney, you brought up a number of organizations that are doing mentoring and doing it really well here in our community. The Sioux 52 is not, just for our audience, is not a new program. It's an initiative to highlight those that are doing it well, bring others alongside, and really amplify that for the entire community, and provide that rallying cry. So thanks for highlighting those that have come before. And this is, like you said, not new. We're doing it really well. But like you said, really well is not good enough for South Dakotans and Greater Sioux Falls. We want to make it even better. And let's touch on another item that you brought up, Vaney, with regard to diversity. It's no secret there's growing diversity in our community. Recent statistics would say K through 12, we're at about 40% non-white. And both of you work very closely with our youth. That's our future. Vaney, I've heard you say before, Sioux Falls isn't necessarily that different. We're just early.
Yeah.
Unpack that for us. Talk about that, and then what do you see as our future in this community?
Well, sometimes when these things happen, they tend to happen nationally, and we end up being observers of other people's circumstances, and that becomes our fodder or our conversation. And ultimately, what we want to challenge is the idea that we're just some off the cuff thing, that we're just something outside of what's happening in the world. We're just simply early in our process. So when we look at a Minneapolis, or when we look at those different places, we're not special in that way, right? A lot of those places were where we are at currently at one point in time. And when you look at the 40% diversity that we have in our schools, when you look at our migration that we have and the percentage of diversity that we have in that, and people coming from different communities with different perspectives, and we look at all of those different things, when we add 250,000 people, when we add 300,000 people, when we increase the density, so now more people are living closer together, and you can't have two lots in between you and your neighbor, and that's not really a thing anymore. When we have to share resources and they become more scarce, and just the natural things that happen with any type of growth start to multiply, then what will these relationships look like? Because if they're not real now, if we don't have relationships where we can see what's happening in our schools or with people in our community, and we can't solve this now, we can't really dig in now, what happens when it compounds? What happens when it gets bigger? What happens when it gets scarier or more frustrating? And so what I always try to inform people is we have to suspend the idea that we're special, that we're just the only people who don't have these problems or ever had, and we're Mayberry, you know. We're not. We're at a certain point in our walk, and we got a lot of it in front of us, more in front of us than behind us. And so we got to be thinking about the future, and we can see it in our schools. We can see it in all of these environments. We need to prepare for that. We need to let those people know that we care about them and we love them, and that we're going to support them, build them, develop them, and then we will have expectations of them. But not until we've made the responsible investments in them.
Yeah, Lieutenant Thum, from your perspective, you have school resource officers that are
Yeah.
in the schools. You get to see firsthand. What's your take on when you fast forward 10,
Yeah.
15, 20 years?
And I'll circle back to that. But initially, I mean, I remember coming and driving into the west side of Sioux Falls, and my family's from Bridgewater, South Dakota. When we knew we were back, we got by Skunk Creek and saw the sign that said population like 80,000 or something like that. You know, I'm 40 years old,
Yeah.
right? In as a lifelong Sioux Falls resident, and see where the population's at. Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be thinking, right, that this city hasn't changed and this city isn't progressing and changing, and we need to also recognize that and change along with it and make adaptations. Like you say, we're not any different than anywhere else. We're just in that growth process. And one thing I always talk about too as we change is, okay, in my career span of 15 years, we've kind of had to start to shift our idea to being a big town to a metro police department, a metro fire department, a metro everything, right? Because we're not just a big town anymore. We're in that transition to a more metro feel. And with that just comes the recognition that, yeah, well, we need to reach out. We need to recognize what we're doing. And then part of that, you say too, is like school resource officers, which receive a lot of attention right now with a lot of the national conversation. But Vaney and I were reminiscing because, as we've discussed previously, we were high school classmates. And when Officer DeBoer was the first officer that showed up at Lincoln High School in I should know the year.
Right.
I should know. But Vaney and I graduated in 98. And I'm like, what's this cop doing in our school? What's that all about?
Right.
And then, but Vaney, what was the perspective you shared before?
No, yeah, the big thing for me was that was the first positive interaction I had ever had with a law enforcement officer. You know, up until then, it was 100% all the way negative, except for maybe like somebody coming by the school for dare and doing or whatever. But it was pretty much all negative. That was one of the first people that actually engaged me as a man, as a person that had feelings and emotions, and actually talked to me and as just a normal person. And as we were talking about, you know, the balance of these things. Yep. Right. You know, that was important for me to have a person that I could actually engage with that started to change my perceptions about how I felt about law enforcement. And we're thoughtful all the time about how do you have that presence in relationship, but where's relationship? Yeah. You know, versus a force.
And we were talking about that before too. And I think you really, for a lot of people, they have to understand the school resource officer program, and to get the best perspective, you have to talk to the students and the teachers sometimes as what the role they're filling. And the officers, as the model goes, need to make sure they're balancing the relationship component, because the schools do have some responsibility for upholding the rules of their facility and not inappropriately leaning on school resource officers to be, the enforcement of that. That's not the idea of the program. That's not the design of the program. It's to build relationships, to be there for school security, but also to work with staff and students to create one milepost or one point of something that we can positively build from. And I think, again, we can't speak about what happens in other SRO programs in other cities, and we know where ours is at, but no, that's one important tool. But I think going back to, again, when I was a kid, and even now when I'm early in the COP years, like, yeah, so what is our job other than a Minnesota Vikings football card dispenser when I was a kid? Right. You go find the cop to get the card, and that was your interaction, or a sticker dispenser. Which I got all sorts of crazy stories about being a sticker dispenser. Because again,
Sure,
it's community outreach is much more than handing out stickers, right? Or just being there. And now we're looking at a department, what programs do we put in place to up that game as far as that community outreach goes? And I went to a hydrant party a couple weeks ago.
I actually called you while you were there.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
You called me. I was at the hydrant party, and I was getting sprayed by a hose because the firefighters saw a target of opportunity and got me, right? But what was interesting about that is how good it is for your soul to get out a little bit and just have fun with kids in that moment, and kind of, I mean, really, I haven't had that much fun at work in a long time. And that was including dancing the YMCA with the firefighters, and because the DJ made us do it. But also just interacting with kids in just this really fun setting, right? So here we are, kind of post a lot of what we've dealt with as a society, and I'm like, well, how are we going to be received in this moment, right? With me and Officer Valen out there, and kids couldn't get in line quick enough to take pictures with us. They sit by this cop car and do different things and interact. And again, we just have to always be. We talk about the changing diversity, is just finding ways that we're not just going to one section of town. These hydrant parties are great because they're all over town, right? But again, not being complacent, that's not good enough, right? One hydrant party is not good enough. What are we doing further to get in there and work on some issues there as well? So
yeah, great. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective and your leadership to be part of the community. This is our town, and we appreciate that. That's actually a great segue to this next topic I want to cover. And that the law enforcement training facility. Last week, renderings and details were unveiled on the future public safety training complex and 911 call center. And we're going to build it on the outskirts of town. This comes with a price tag that was in the papers, $52 million, significant investment for our community. My question really focuses on, and this is coming at a time when we're going to further invest in law enforcement, but it's coming with a backdrop of we're hearing voices across the country calling to defund the police. You talk to us about that dichotomy.
Sure.
What we're seeing here locally versus what's happening across the country.
Great question, because this has been in the works for years. This training center, and it really is. It's fire department, us, and then added on now as the 911 call center. And if you looked at some of our dilapidated facilities, it's a long time overdue. Again, as we transition from that big town to that mid-metro component. And what this allows us to do is really keep our training at the highest level possible, to train our recruits here in town, run an academy type setting, because the reality is, while Pierre does law enforcement training, the law enforcement needs throughout the state are very, very different, from a one officer department to a highway patrolman, to a gaming commission officer, to I can't remember what the cattle cops are, but they got their own too, right? They work on these different issues, to now our kind of metro issues that we face. And while we talk about, I think defunding gets the conversation off on the wrong step when we use that word. Like, we can't even talk about what we want, because sometimes when we talk about what we want, we both want the same thing, right? And I'll circle back to that, but increased training, the idea that we can diminish training and somehow expect a better product is a little naive. It's just something, if you want the best police department, we have to have the best training available and make sure we're encompassing all that within that structure. And again, working together with fire, working together with partner agencies. But I think, again, that big push about defunding, if we sat down and had a conversation, and Vaney's like, I want to make sure that the cops no longer have to deal with homeless, addiction, mental health calls. And you're like, all right, well, show me it on paper, right? Because we've been kind of tasked with dealing with these for quite some time. If we're dealing with a symptom of many root issues that we cannot cure, right? So if there's some program or initiative that can be put forward, but until things of that nature are in place, a lot of things are going to fall on law enforcement to have to deal with those issues. Because for many, many years, we've been, if there's nobody else to deal with that issue, the cops will take care of it, right? You have a possum in your window well, the cops will come take care of that, or bats in your belfry. Well, then we have animal control that does just taking those jobs away from police officers. And I think there's other conversations that could be had that how can we lighten the load for law enforcement to deal with some of these issues, which all we can deal with are symptoms. When there's root core causes out there, and as a society, we have to decide how to work through those issues. But again, let's bring solutions to the table, and let's just not talk about redistributing money. Let's say, what does this look like, right? And what are we currently doing that we can expand on or advance, from our mobile crisis team to some of our outreach programs that we have for different communities. Let's have these conversations and not get lost at the point where we're at the defunding thing and we're just going to go like this. But let's look at, like, for example, what Fifth Street Connection, what other people are doing in town to work with mental health and work with them and support them a little bit more. And again, work together on these issues, because we're more than happy to be part of the answer, but we're not the solution to many things that I think people would like us to be.
But yet, as taxpayers, we call you wanting you to fix
because
whatever it is.
You pay your taxes pay my salary, as I've been told hundreds of times over. I should come and deal with that. But the reality is for this person, I may be able to de-escalate them in crisis from their mental health situation, because we do have more training than just the average person would have. And we're not psychologists. We can't get all the degrees we need in that time. But the reality is that problem's still going to be there tomorrow. And we try to expand some of our offerings from mental health, CROs, and other different ways to look at it. But again, which is why I think this conversation that we're having as a society is good. Well, let's what's the word you use? Reimagine?
Yeah.
Let's reimagine a few components on this. But I think from us, like, again, from a dilapidated training center or no training center that we had, there also has to be an investment in training and equipment. Body cameras, right? Something we all agree we want.
It's all part of the mayor's budget that was just released.
Yeah, and many of us are like, let's get these out. Let's be to the point where we can, because that's what society is demanding of us right now. And for years we've said, but budgets always get in the way of a lot of things. It's reality. It shouldn't be sometimes things are in need right at the moment when something happens. Well, we probably needed them, could get them before too. So,
For sure.
Vaney, when I say defund the police, your thoughts? That's happening at a time when our community is, like we said, stepping up and investing in our law enforcement.
So as he pointed out, when we start at that point, the conversation obviously usually takes a left, and that's part of being part of the national conversation, right? There are locations in this country where people really feel that way. And they are really there based off of a long, long history of mistrust and mismanagement of funds and those type of things. The question really becomes, what is our particular circumstance? And to what Jon was saying in terms of where we're allocating our money and the plans that we have, we don't know that not having enough money is the issue, right? We need to know what it is that we want to do. Now, if you're telling me that we can't manage any of these programs that allow us to address prevention, and we're building a $42 million building, I have problems with that. We don't know that that's the case as of yet. And so for me, the very first thing we have to do is really imagine what we want this community to look like and how we want it to run. And we need to try to fund those things, which happens in a couple of different pillars. One, we have to be thoughtful about how we're using mentorship and nonprofits where we're doing people power things, where we're going to the people, where we can personally contribute and participate in solving the problem. One of the other pillars is obviously law enforcement, and we need to be thoughtful about what it is they're doing. As a taxpayer, paying your salary. Do I think it's the best use of funds to have them go in and talk to somebody's neighbor because their grass is too long because you don't have the courage to go talk to them? Absolutely not. Do I think it makes sense for a a officer with $15,000 worth of equipment on him and however many weeks of training to be standing at a traffic stop on a non-violent offense or a non-DUI offense for an hour and a half where somebody could be doing it in a polo and a clipboard? No, I don't think that makes sense. And so there's a lot of things that I think we're deploying police to do that they shouldn't be doing. And when people look at it just through the lens of defunding the police, leaving them unable to do the things that we want them to do, I can understand why that would be jarring for them. But really what I think where we can all start, where we can all agree is to be able to say, we are over leveraging this resource. I don't think anybody can dispute that. We are over leveraging this resource. It creates more touch points for something to go wrong. We're making it more difficult for them to be at hydrant parties, for them to be having social interactions because they don't have the bandwidth. It makes it more difficult to stay diverse at a percentage that's representative of our community because of the fact we have to have so many officers. It makes it so that we can't train them as long as we would like to. It makes it so that we can't pay them as much as we would like to. And it also makes it difficult for us to be able to have the spread of presence where we prevent crime through presence versus coming as a responding force to do a particular thing. These are all things that just make good sense. Now, you couple those type of things with creating real programs that allow you to be more preventive. Listen, we don't just have a fire department. We also have fire code. We also have inspectors. We do preventive things to keep fires from happening so we don't have to over leverage the response. It's the same thing with the police. We want to put more investment, more engagement on the front end and prevent these things from happening by making sure we have well-adjusted, well-trained, mentored, educated young people, making sure we have adults that when they have issues, we're dealing with their addictions. Let me just say this real quick. When we think about justice, right? Right now, we are one of the least populated states in the union. And per capita, we police more people than anyone. I mean, we incarcerate more people than anyone, okay? We incarcerate people at a higher than national average, and we have crime lower than the national average. And most of those people are for drug and alcohol related things. Now, some people just think that as a matter of crime and punishment, you know, you do this, you do that. But what's happening is we're putting our state at a capital disadvantage to other states. We are incarcerating people, putting them in the system, making them harder to employ, making them harder to get resources, making it harder for them to do all of those different things, hurting us in a capital way. We're spending to the tune of $20,000 per inmate to house these people, over double what we spend on our students, right? These things make no sense because they put us at a financial disadvantage and they put us at a human capital disadvantage. These are not liberal or conservative principles. These are just good sense principles. Why are we doing these type of things? So it's not just about the police specifically. It's about the policy that surrounds it. It's about what we're doing in our communities to support it. And it's about doing preventive measures to make sure we never get to the point we have the type of crime that we have in other parts of the nation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and coming up this fall will be the opening of the Triage Center, which has been much discussed, and another alternative way. And again, looking at what's been successful in other communities and trying to apply that to Sioux Falls. And I think it's just a good example again of what are we doing that's not necessarily strictly within the confines of either the criminal justice system or the school or city government, but also something that looks at a broad approach from many, many people to deal with a complex problem. And I think when we sit down and talk, and Vaney and I recently were part of a conversation with a group of people, and we talked about what we'd actually like to see, right? Well, the cop and somebody on the opposite end of who you would look in that criminal justice spectrum, who would maybe be at odds, right? We actually want to see the same thing. What we want to see is youth supported, families supported, and better mentorship and resources for kids and for families. So that way, many of these problems we see aren't going to manifest themselves, right? And so when we strip back all the politics of the conversation, we probably want closer to the same thing than we actually realize. And I think, again, let's not get bogged down by words and catchphrases and look for solutions, I think is what we need to remember.
Yeah. So well said. Thank you both. And both of you keep coming back to mentoring, which is why downtown Rotary, the city of Sioux Falls, the entire community wants to push this forward, because that is the ultimate preventative medicine for a lot of the things that we're seeing happen, not only in our own community, but throughout the country. Let's come back to the law enforcement training facility. You talked about the education that you receive. There's been a lot of talk about how the law is enforced.
Sure.
Talk to us about the training that you're receiving today through the Sioux Falls Police Department, the training that you'll receive tomorrow, and what's important within that, so that regardless of somebody's race, socioeconomic status, that the law is enforced in a way that we all want to see.
Gotcha. In all the training kind of centers around being a fair and impartial member of the law enforcement, right? And you have to strip out a lot of the other external noise when you make decisions. And from early on, from within the first week when we do our ethics and career survival course, to talk about what exactly expectations are, what exactly how we look at the lens of how we look through things, but also bringing stuff to light through implicit bias training and other means that will make people aware of who they are and who their backgrounds are. And what we talked about earlier too, with having a police department that's representative. Well, we've now even pushed harder that within that recruit class or that group, that they explore the diversity amongst each other. I know our recent class had 20%, and now getting that perspective from your coworkers as to understanding what exactly different parts of the community are, and making those extra efforts from the start to really make sure that we're driving home these principles. Now, again, a lot of these, you have to make sure you're hiring the right people. I can give all the training I want, and it's not going to matter if I'm not hiring the right people. So what we invest on the front end through background checks, through all the different things, are really something we have to really make sure we stick to our standards on, because if we're not making sure we get the right people in the door, I could give them a Harvard MBA, right? And it doesn't matter, right? Because that's the real emphasis. And then additionally, within our department, you drink from a fire hose the first 15 months you're on the job, but what mentorship are we doing within to raise up officers? They're like, okay, this is how Officer X does it. I like the way he does it. I like the way he respects people. And let's make sure that we're emulating this officer, maybe not somebody who isn't as skilled in certain techniques or tactics, because not everybody's going to be a master of everything, right? There's going to be some, Vaney and I could go to a call, and Vaney's got the silver tongue, and he's able to put that issue to bed, where officer, let's just say I'm the other officer, and I just can't talk my way out of this, right? And this is something that I don't have the skills to do.
Well, and a lot of those situations that you might see are going to come early in a person's career. Somebody's 20 years in on the street, they know how to get in and get out, do the thing, and let everybody go about their business. And that's why that front end is so important in those situations where you still got a lot of nerves and things of that nature. And
then our training officer program is really built up more on adult learning, looking at the holistic emotional intelligence approach, which is, I know in many parts of the business world, we've talked about emotional intelligence forever, but as law enforcement, we've been pushing that component for a long time, because it's really something, understanding yourself in these situations, because it is easy, not always easy, but in situations that are not intense and don't have an elevated level of danger or things of that nature, to hold your wits about you, right? The true, really masterclass policing is when things are tense and things are getting to the point where it's a little bit out of control. How do I manage my emotions, the emotions of others? And sometimes, like I said, that's possible. Other times it's not, depending on other factors. But again, the idea that we're not pushing out training, our training doubles what the state expectation is for law enforcement every year. We've always put an emphasis on training, but again, making time for training, because the reality is that we are seeing an increase every year of calls, and we have to carve this training time out. And law enforcement probably could train 50% of the time and work 50% of the time. The reality is it's like 5% of the time and working 95% of the time. There's simply not the time of the day and enough time to train on every single component. So
that gets back to what we talked about earlier, the calls that you may not need to be at with your training.
Right.
So what's the return on investment on a well-trained police officer is far more, even from a financial dollars and cents standpoint. That person's more likely to make good decisions, not end up in litigation, not end up in different bad predicaments. as opposed to what we saw in other parts of the country where some bad training or other issues resulted in massive chaos, right? So again, we have to keep emphasizing that training piece and looking at best practices, but also being open to, okay, well, what's the issue we see right now? Let's reach out and find some training that addresses that issue. Again, it's diminishing returns. Like lack of investment will get you suboptimal outcomes more often than not when it comes to training.
Well said. I know you mentioned before, we're looking for the same thing. We want fair and just law enforcement, and for Rotarians, for our kids and grandkids. I want them growing up in a community where they look up and are excited about a potential future in law enforcement. I think that's important. And you talked about that mentoring component. Everybody needs a mentor, whether it's in their career or in their life outside of that.
And we've even started where when they get hired, we'll assign them a mentor to get them through that starting process. And we've also reached out now to mentor their families and try to say, okay, how are we bringing your family into this culture or this family? So you understand the difficulties that they're going to face. And then at home, you can maybe be another resource or another ally to help them deal through some of the stress. Because reality is that it's been a very stressful period for a lot of people. And for law enforcement in particular, it's been very stressful, and managing that stress with your family, managing that stress out on the streets as well, because while in Sioux Falls, it's a very supportive community. I probably haven't got any more random expletives thrown my way and middle fingers than I have in the past couple months as well too, right? And so again, the stress of the moment and working through it and leaning on relationships within your agency, outside your agency are very important too.
I want to speak to that a little bit, because I think, for Sioux Falls, if we want to do something that's going to make our situation much better, it's this piece, how we have this dialogue about each other, right? And even when we say, you got to talk to the other side, it's still establishing the idea that there's sides.
Yeah.
What we have to get back to is understanding the police are the community, from the community, for the community, of the community, the whole nine, right? Yes, tax dollars pay their salary, but they pay taxes too, okay? And so they get to have expectations of what's happening in the community. What I think has to happen is, in order for us to get to the point where we can have real conversations that are not based in a defensive nature, where accountability is not an attack, where we can't say openly, this is something that we need you to do better. We have to get to the point where we, as the folks who are working in the community, can say what we want, but what we're going to do to further that idea, and then have the expectation that internally these type of things are happening. Because I'll tell you this, and there's nuance into what I'm about to say, but I'll tell you this. I don't think there are any bad cops. I don't think there's a such thing as a bad cop. Here's what I mean by that. I don't think the uniform makes you a cop. I don't think the gun makes you a cop. I don't think the badge makes you a cop. The oath does. And if you keep the oath, you're a good cop, period, point blank in the story, because the oath is what makes you that. If you don't keep the oath, you are either a criminal or an accomplice, okay? And so for me, what would give the public confidence, what gives us all confidence, is knowing that we're in a situation where we're putting people in the best situation to be successful. And if for whatever reason they're not the right fit, or they're not going to honor that oath, that cop that's next to them is going to do something. And one of the things I tell all my friends that are officers, if you don't want to be confused with bad officers, you got to stop standing next to them, right? It's confusing because you're wearing the same uniform. And so we need to be able to say in those halls that we're saying, these are oath keepers. These are people who are keeping that oath, and we need to honor, respect, equip, train, prepare, laud, love those people who are doing those things. For those who cannot hold that oath, we need to quickly, swiftly identify them and move them on to another career opportunity that's not in public service. That's what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be any deeper than that.
No, and within that conversation, again, I've taught this career survival ethics class for, I don't know, a decade. I've taught a lot of classes, and this one always sticks with me. And I was with another guy. I'm not going to steal this quote. I like to steal this quote. I'm not going to. It's not my quote. It's that, and within this ethics class, we talk about a lot of these duties. And his quote was, "I will lose my life for you, but I will not lose my job for you." Right. And that's his oath, is that I will give it all for you. because that's part of what our relationship is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you expect me to hide your misdeeds
Hello.
at the detriment of my job, no, I have too much invested in my oath and the stability of my family and stability of my community to forsake that trust. So I will lose my life for you. I will not lose my job for you. And it's kind of the mantra that we've kind of carried with us. Now, again, we have to just make sure that we have these and many of these initiatives that are coming out are things that were maybe in like duty to act and duty to intervene. Like that's within many law enforcement's training and purview, but is it maybe in a policy, right? And I think it's what society is asking right now. And so I think, again, you're back. If there's bad cops amongst us, we will want them out of the profession, because as you've said many times, they don't make my job any safer.
They do not.
No, they make my job much, much more difficult, right? To have that. And again, you take that nationally and then apply it to all these different departments. The sins of the few are broadcasted on the many, and even the sins of another jurisdiction are broadcast onto you as well too. And so we've seen that play out time and time again. And again, we want the same thing. We want the same thing. And when we have these conversations, I get frustrated, and I deleted my social media accounts shortly after everything happened, just by looking at the dialogue and stuff that's happening. We can argue all we want on Facebook. I'm just going to say this. And all you're doing is feeding some toxic stuff into your soul, because you're either not seeing what you want to see, or you're sitting in your echo chamber when it comes to these issues. And either way, it just pushes us further apart. If we're having conversations in love, in trust, in respect, right? I'm not just going to shut you down because you tell me you don't think cops should stop cars anymore, right?
Right.
I'm just like, well, forget Vaney. Vaney's an idiot. We're done. I'm going to this Facebook page. And I'm going to talk about this, right? No, I'm like, well, tell me what you mean by that, Vaney, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll have a discussion and dialogue, and I'll provide you my perspective.
Right.
And then maybe what we find is that somewhere in the middle, we have some common ground or some understanding. But instead, I'm just going to go on social media and say outright lies about people because that feeds my thing.
The flip side for me to say, to ask, hey, man, do you like being out there in like 100-degree weather full whatever, just they're taking down, people play. I want to know the experience. I want to understand what's actually transpiring. So as we try to craft policy, because that's the thing, it has to be real. We got to do real stuff here. You know what I mean? And that's where I would like to see more engagement for the community, whether it's in an advisory capacity or whatever. We have the community ambassador program, those type of things, to bring the community together for us to understand. Because one of the things that's just frustrating, and this isn't anything, this is right now for our essential workers, for our first responders, for whatever, we get into situations where it's like, when we try to create policy, people who don't understand are wanting to make the policy, and people who are having the policy made for them are saying, you don't understand. Well, if that's the issue, we got to get to the point where we can understand. I need to understand what you're going through, what you're experiencing, and I need you to understand how I'm being affected by this. And through that, we can develop empathy, and we can create policy that is better for everyone. Best idea wins. This is not about Republican, Democrat. This is not about cop or not cop, law-abiding citizen or not law-abiding. Has nothing to do with any of those things. This is about best idea wins. Let's do what's best for the community, period. Because here's the thing. The things that a lot of people are asking for, the policies that help Black people stop dying unnecessarily, will help white people from dying unnecessarily. Right? The reality of it is, like, if you're in the All Lives Matter camp, then what are we arguing about? Then you should be the first person in line to say, well, let's address this problem that happens to be disproportionately affecting this person or that person. And that goes all the way down the line in everything. We haven't talked about the social economics of it, but we know that that's probably the greatest driver. We just know that when we look at the social economics, it disproportionately affects people in particular races. And that's why it comes to that. But whether it's this and for that, for this reason or that reason, we know that these are the results. We're not satisfied with the results. So we have to do better, and the best idea has to win.
Yeah, we can scream about the symptoms, right? Right. We can scream all we want about it without looking deeper into those issues and the root causes. Then again, we're going to be screaming at the symptoms for a long time about what's happening.
Yeah, and you brought it up when we were talking ahead of this. We're pretty good at finding problems. Awesome. We're at the implementing solution stage, and that's as South Dakotans and members of the Greater Sioux Falls community. I think that's what we can all take pride in. You talk about the character, the ethics. You talk about a willingness to listen. Well, this is an opportunity, and Downtown Rotary wants to be part of that. Using the platform that we have, let's get these things out there. Let's help others understand. Let's figure out a way before we do get ourselves in a position where you're in Minneapolis. We've grown and grown. We didn't have these conversations back in 2020. That could have prevented some of that. So thank you for it. It's great to hear the back and forth between the two of you. Really, we're looking for the same. We're looking for the same things, and that's actually going to transition well to. Great to hear you turned off social media, but I am curious from a police relations standpoint. How do you feel we're doing as a community? Where do we have opportunity for improvement?
So there's always opportunity for improvement, and we've asked ourselves that internally, and so we've looked at what we have as school resource officers, what we're trying to do with hydrant parties, what we're trying to do with organizing. We've got a soccer game hopefully coming up that we're organizing. We've got Citizens Police Academy. We have all these different programs, right, that we go out and try to interact. Cops with kick carts and kids and go-karts, and I can't remember all of them, but we've tried all this stuff. But I think what we really have to work on now is saying, okay, we've got all these different programs, but how are you carrying this mission with you on a daily basis when you go out and take your calls, right? Because like I talked about, we can't wave a wand and corporately make relations have things be better, okay? So for example, one day I'm like, I really enjoy shooting baskets, even though I'm pretty terrible now as I get older. I love throwing a football. I think there was a news story recently where a cop's out shooting baskets with some kids at the park. Right now, he doesn't know that's happening, but they're catching it on camera. And what's funny is a month before that, I'm like, I need to go out, and like I said, I was having one of those days, and this is one of those days that I go out and kind of fill my soul a little bit. So I went to 6 different parks to try to find some kids to play with. No kids in the park anywhere.
Yeah.
Right. It was too hot, maybe, or something like that. I ended up buying some lemonade from a lemonade stand and talking to some people about their garden. But how do we make time for this? And Vaney and I have had conversations about this too, is that how do you make it central to your organizational culture that time they go out, they are looking for that positive interaction, especially when it comes to kids. Or I tell officers many times when I would get them into my squad, I'm like, treat everybody as if you would want your grandmother treated, your mother treated, your brother or your sister treated, right? Now, sometimes in conflict, that's not possible.
Sure.
But if I'm out taking your report and your kids are there, other people there, I'm going out of my way to make those interactions. Again, I believe we will rebuild our relationships one person at a time rather than by broad reaching policies or things of that nature. And so now we're looking at, as call volume goes up and our numbers really maintain, when you look at the ratios, we have, as our call volume goes up, we don't have as many cops per se with free time on the streets. Well, how do we carve out that free time and make sure that's central to who we are? And I think that's the challenges that metro policing comes into. Is I may have a deputy or an officer somewhere who's responsible for 1 or 2 calls a day. Now, our second shift officers might be taking 20 in their 8-hour shift. So where does the time come? It may come on the calls, and it may come with opportunities that are available elsewhere. We have to make sure we carve that time out for that.
You talked about resources. We talk about police public relations. We look at you.
Yeah.
What can we do as citizens to continue to encourage those in the uniform? To ensure that relationship isn't a one-way outreach.
For sure. I think we have to have some of the difficult conversations amongst ourselves. And again, police are part of the community. So I look forward to the time where they can take off the uniform, come as just a member of the community and just talk, right? And not have to have that pressure on them, right? And so that's one thing where we can have some of these difficult conversations and work through some of those things. So again, we're coming with plans. We're coming with ideas of things that we want to have happen. We're not just saying we want this result, figure it out, and I'm gonna go do whatever, right? It's being able to say, hey, I researched the policy. I researched what has happened. I've spent some time thinking about how to approach this or how to approach that. And here's some things we like to see. What's the practicality of this? Now, That's going to require some real engagement and people willing to have that lesson. Because a lot of times historically, what has been the story is it's like what's in the book. If it's in the book, it's good because it's in the book, but you don't get to see what's in the book or help write what's in the book. That part has to change. But we can have a lot of those conversations beforehand. Again, people can engage and mentor. People can put together their own groups. We just had a community talk, and we had people come together, and we got some really great conversations where people were able to dialogue, and we narrowed it down to 3 topics: youth, justice and justice reform, and leadership. A lot of great ideas. A lot of people got to get other people's experiences and change and realize that they have their own biases. They have their own blind spot. They have their own gaps that they need to fill. And by developing that compassion allowed them to know that, first of all, the issues that we have go far beyond the police, far beyond, and we have to be thoughtful about how we rise that tide to lift all of those boats. The other thing that we can do is we can encourage people to participate in terms of the actual profession. And there's a lot of different auxiliary parts of support in that profession to get people in that game so we can see the type of diversity that we want. We can't just expect them to find those people. We have to try to help lift those people up and make that a viable profession that people will really engage in. We also have to be at a place where we are not, ready, fire, aim. We're ready, aim, fire before we get frustrated, before we really go at people. Let's try to have accountability through relationship. I want to pick up the phone and say, help me understand. And I do this. Where there's things that that hit me the wrong way, that don't sound right to me, that seem like abuses of power, and I pick up the phone and I say, please help me understand what's going on here because I'm feeling it right now. And then usually I can get some insight that at least gives me more perspective, or at least points me in the direction of what I need to ask for specifically to bring about the result. So I think having real ask, having those internal conversations that can be difficult, being able to have those on the front end so there's less emotion in it and more tactile things that we can do. And then I think the other piece of it is just lifting people up to participate. And then lastly, supporting our nonprofits and those people who fill in the gaps of a lot of the work that take pressure off of them. Because what I like to see from my officers is more relationship. I want to see more people out of the squad cars. I want to see them engaging with people more, having those difficult conversations. I like to see more folks on college campuses, talking to these young folks, how to engage them, these people who are going to be our next leaders. I like them to be empowered, to have opinions, to be able to say how they feel about things and to be able to be human in the moment. And I think we can support that by having some compassion, some empathy, and some pause, and just taking a moment to understand what people are experiencing and be able to put together thought through practical approaches that we expect people to take that take care of us.
I think in one of the points you brought up is bringing people up to be part of this profession, right? Well, if we continue to degrade the profession and engage in this widespread, at least not so much locally, but nationally, trashing of law enforcement, why would you expect people to sign up for that job, right? So like especially good people, right? So because good people is what you desire. Now, if we put up so many conversations that make this negative or paint all officers as being, monsters or bad people, then good people aren't going to sign up for this. Additionally, too, if I train young people and say, you know what, all cops are bad, all cops are this, and then why would they want to join that group, right? So we have to champion and highlight the positive aspects of law enforcement, because there are many positive aspects of law enforcement. But again, we're in this for different reasons. We're not in this for financial gain. Like there's other professions that are out there, right? It's a sense of service to community. The most successful cops have a sense of service to community and a servant heart because they want to give back to their community and then work within that. So how do we identify those positive aspects of law enforcement, talk to young people and be like, you know what, be the cop you want to see within the confines of the system, right? Work with the system. But if I'm teaching kids from an early start, I think we shared the story before about it. The kid hanging out the window, giving me the middle finger at 5 years old in the middle of that protest, he's never going to have a functional relationship with police officers. Right? He's never going to want to be a police officer. And from that early age on, and so maybe we talk about with our kids, what's the good we see, what's the bad we see. And honestly, in every profession, there's some good and there's some bad. Will be the best within your profession. In certain professions, it's just magnified, whether it's lawyers or easy targets,
Right.
cops,
Right.
clergy, politicians, doctors. Sometimes like they're like
Mhm.
targets
Yeah, yeah.
we like to engage in. But there's some rotten teachers out there,
Mhm.
right?
That's for sure.
And there's some phenomenal teachers out there. So identify the good and then encourage people to shoot for that part of the profession. I think is
It's
where
so
we
great.
need to be.
Yeah, it's so great to hear you say that. And thank you for helping us and being here today to shine a light on the profession and what can do in building understanding. Understanding was part of our title for today's program. And Vaney, what struck me when you said making a call and say, help me understand. If we started each conversation with help me understand versus the attacks that we've seen the last 60, 90 days and beyond, how much further we'd get ahead be ahead as a community. I really want to talk about that because there is a lot of pain. So the natural reaction when there's pain is not a, hey, help me understand.
Yep.
We talk about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks. They've really shone a light on this here recently, talking about racial injustice. And you just add to that, living through a pandemic is just kind of essentially throwing a powder keg on that. You have loss of jobs, loss of life, loss of freedom of movement, all these things that have created fear, uncertainty, and frustration. But that puts us at this point in 2020 where, as Rotarians, as members of Sioux Falls community, we've said we can't look away. This is our time. This is the time that we don't sweep this under the rug. We have those tough conversations, and it's not just conversations. It's what do we do about that? That's one thing that just being vulnerable, I struggle with. I'm one person. What do I do as one person in a community to help create better understanding, better community? So that's my last question for you too, is for those that are out there saying, well, it's August 3rd, 2020. What can I do? I'm just one person. How do you encourage them? How do you inspire them? What do you share with our viewers to say, hey, this is a first step or a next step?
Yeah. First, let me say, like, you know, as a Rotarian, like, I'm just super proud at this conversation. I'm so proud that we're doing this because you saying those folks' names is just something that didn't happen before this point ever, really, where we really acknowledge the frequency in which some of these things happen and the pain that is connected to it, the pain and the hurt. That's what I want people to, because when we volley these arguments, a lot of times we skip past the human the piece of it, and that people that are hurting are in pain, you know, at every aspect. And so the first thing I would ask people to do is be considerate about other people's experiences and take their word for it. If you tell me that you're going through pain as an officer, I'll take your word for it. You don't have to prove it, right? I don't want you feeling that. And when I tell you I'm having this experience as a person, take my word for it, right? But what are we going to do to advance it? So the first thing is just have some compassion and engage with people. The second thing is expand your worldview, challenge yourself, have some courage. There's a lot, we operate in cowardice a lot of the times around these conversations where anything that makes us feel uncomfortable, we reject it, we lash out at it because it forces us to look at ourselves and see some flaws that we have about ourselves. Honestly, I'll tell you this, the most white privileged thing a person can do for me is present their anger or their guilt. I don't want either from you because it does absolutely nothing for me or the situation. You can keep them both. What I would like for you to do is participate, mentor someone, contribute to a program, ideally someone that is actually engaging with these different audiences, by those audiences, support your businesses, and ask for leadership that is going to represent the future that we want. And so if people are test ballooning kookery in our state or saying things that are just on their face or overtly racist, we have to remove those people and get people who are going to have conversations, who are going to make real policy. That's what people can do right now.
Anything to add to that? Thank you, Vaney.
No, good words. You're talking about your anger or your guilt.
Yeah.
And I don't want that either, actually, because I like other things too. Like let's not just sit in our camps and be outraged for who we think each side or the other. That doesn't help either side. Put your words into action and do something with it. And I think, again, I'll come back to to some real looking at putting yourself out there and maybe what seems very uncomfortable for people at the start, all of a sudden becomes a way of life and something you do on a regular basis. When I first started work in the Northeast, now keep in mind, I grew up in Sioux Falls, right? I thought I had a pretty good handle of the makeup of Sioux Falls. And I grew up in Pettigrew Heights. So I thought, even more so, I understand what Sioux Falls is about. Well, then I start working up Northeast, and I realized on North Cleveland and East 6th Street, there's a community that I never knew existed in Sioux Falls, which is this, I knew there was African immigrants in town, right? But how much had I been exposed to that part of town? How much had I really put myself out there? And by going to all these different police calls, I started just striking up normal conversation. And from a cop, they kind of look at you funny sometimes. I'm like, oh, where are you from? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Let me learn about your culture. You're from Sudan. Tell me about your experience if you're comfortable, right? And these conversations would happen, and all of a sudden, the knowledge that I was enriched with from all of the different groups that I had interactions with, I could carry with me as an officer and then have further conversations. So now I'm working at Lutheran Social Services, and not working there, but as their liaison, I would teach orientation for new Americans, right? Well, now with me now, I bring a knowledge of different cultures and different people, and I can interact. Or even recently, the Oromos had a demonstration downtown. Like, let me educate myself on these topics so I can go out and have an informed conversation with people. Now, if we look at all the different groups, the 40% diversity within our school system, we have a lot of different groups within Sioux Falls to interact with. And it doesn't just become just an African-American law enforcement thing, right? It's a society thing. It's everybody. We're all from Native American to African immigrant to all the different Hispanic groups, the Nepalese that are in town, all these different groups. Let's have these conversations that are actually really casual in nature and really invested in the human being. I'm not just invested in you in crisis. Oh, we got a problem because this is happening. Let's talk about each other now, right? Let's talk about each other well before then, and build those relationships and build that understanding. So then when I hear ignorance, oh, why are they protesting about this? Or in particular, the Oromo one is that comes up most recently. I go, well, let me tell you about this. Here's the makeup, and here's what happens, and here's the conversations I've had. So now the conversation that I bring has more background, it has more merit, and I have more credibility, really, because I'm not just speaking from emotion, or I'm not just speaking from what I think is out there. I've invested in different communities and it's really uncomfortable to do because we are kind of tribal in nature. We tend to stick to what we're comfortable with, but learn from your neighbors, right? And carry that learning out and have further conversations. Again, we can't corporately fix anything. If the president signed a bill, or the governor signed a bill, or the mayor signed a bill today and said, yep, here we go, this is taken care of because of this initiative and this initiative and this initiative, it's not going to change. We're all human beings. We need to make the change and have those interactions from that point. Yeah, I think that's my...
So well said. One person at a time. As Rotarians, that's what we promote. And as members of this community, that's the challenge that I hear you to our audience to say, gain an understanding, become more uncomfortable with that you don't know. So I think for a lot of us South Dakotans that might have come from a farm background, we're pretty comfortable hanging with those that think the same way that we do. But I really want to thank you. We're pushing up against our time. I'm going to invite you two back next week because there's so much more that we can unpack with this. And I think that we can help to bring that understanding. But I want to thank you, Vaney, Hariri, your team here at Think 3D Studios for hosting us. Lieutenant Jon Thum, thank you for being here. Thank you for your wisdom and your leadership and taking that oath so that our kids, grandkids can look up to those that are in law enforcement. Just a reminder for those that are viewing, if you're interested in learning more about mentoring, as a mentee or mentor, visit siouxfalls.org. You can also email downtown Rotary Sioux Falls at Sioux Falls Rotary Club at gmail.com. And we want to hear your stories. So we want to hear your stories about mentoring so that we can continue to encourage and inspire others. And then just in closing, we've talked about a lot today, bringing up the importance of mentoring, the tough conversations, understanding we all play a role in that. And no matter how difficult the topic, we want to be there. We want to continue to have those conversations. So I appreciate that. Let's move forward as a community and building understanding. We just wish you the best as you move forward in this week. God bless you, and we'll see you next Monday. Thank you.
So many people in the Sioux Empire could benefit from having a mentor, an ongoing one-to-one relationship to help another person achieve success in the world benefits everyone. Please support and promote the Sioux 52 initiative at your place of work by encouraging your employees to give 1 hour a week to mentoring. That's it. Just 1 hour a week, 52 hours a year. Let's build a community of mentors so our region of opportunity provides opportunity for everyone.